Good evening. I am Film Freak, and it was but my original intention to bring you a review of Steven Soderbergh's latest cinematic atrocity, known as Contagion. However, more important matters have arisen in the form of an impudent resident of the derelict Gehenna of the American Midwest, the critic Jack Napier of Gotham City. Perhaps you have not heard of him. Well, he is not someone you are likely to forget. His blatant disregard for the etiquette of dress, expressed most prominently by his insistence on wearing a hat indoors, makes him a particularly memorable figure. In a video response he formulated for my review of the exquisite 2001 A Space Odyssey, he admonished me for venerating that classic of cinema, and then proceeded most discourteously to threaten to destroy my reputation on YouTube. Well, this clown doesn't realize that I care not for how the mindless masses of this internet community perceive me. They most likely have terrible tastes in film anyway. I care only for the small minority of intellectually notable individuals whom peruse the World Wide Web for people of such refined tastes as I. To further endear said individuals to my erudite tastes in cinema, I shall now reveal my top 20 films of all time. Often coined the USSR's answer to 2001, Solyaris is undoubtedly a masterpiece. In the face of Kubrick's existential space opera, though, it is simply not as impressive a masterpiece, no matter, as Solyaris is still beautifully shot, scored, and acted, and will leave you arguably just as unnerved as old Stanley's film had. Never too farcical or far-fetched, Ealing's last great black comedy is one of the wittiest and darkest films that classic English cinema ever produced. It is the very definition of British humour. Dunn might have been right when he described how death was subservient to man's whimsy, but Hitchcock was almost certainly correct when he plainly demonstrated in this film that man himself was but the bound subject of eternal peonage to fate. Hitchcock knew that each and every man and woman had a fear of what fate would determine was to be the ultimate course of their lives, and so decided to take advantage of this fear and create brilliant suspense through the allegedly true story of how a figure of average social standing that many could identify with was thrown into the lion's den and had his one route of deliberation modified constantly by the very beings that threw him in there in the first place. God, Hitch was cruel. David Lean's tale of misguided allegiances and pointless, though hardly nugatory, tragedies aims not to dwell on war as coarse or foul anathema, but instead a cabalistic absolute that affects humans in ways that our feeble minds cannot possibly predict. This commendably thoughtful view is contemplated by Lean's keen visual eye and Alec Guinness's tender and ultimately terrifying performance. The single greatest political thriller of all time comes in the form of a pop culture realization of the assassination of a relatively obscure Greek politician. An absurd statement certainly, but a sincere one nonetheless. Polanski's atmospheric venture into the mind of a highly disturbed misandrist is one hell of a terrifying experience. Even Polanski's haters have to admit that this film is nothing short of brilliant. A work of ethereal melancholia, something of an oxymoron, I know, an inoffensive jocularity, The Seventh Seal is Bergman's, if not Sweden's, greatest film. Perfect in its imperfections, Godard's Breathless is made with a passion so tactile that what would otherwise be considered postmodernist pretension is elevated to the status of introspective expression. The cinema's greatest directorial debut of all time. To paraphrase Australian film critic David Stratton, all great comedies have a basic theme that is serious. This aphorism is no better exemplified than in Stanley Kubrick's madcap satire Dr. Strangelove. Indeed, I cannot imagine a more somber theme than nuclear holocaust. It seems to be shorn of any convivial aspects, presuming it had any buoyant elements in the first place. with absurd characters delivering doubly absurd lines, my favourite being, "You can't find in here, this is the war room," and very controlled and studied black and white photography showing scenes of galactic insanity. Kubrick creates the cinematic equivalent of Jonathan Swift's satirical essay, A Modest Proposal. And much like with A Modest Proposal, once you start laughing, you simply do not stop. In this behemoth of an action film, the incubus of war is not only beautifully captured, but also fully encapsulated. There are no enemies, there are no allies. Just an extremely imposing Marlon Brando contemplating you with merciless scrutiny. Coppola spent some of the worst years of his life making this film, but I can confidently say that every second of this pain has accorded me immense satisfaction. In Oscar Wilde's original novella, the Mordaunt's erosiveness of his captivating and ingenious wit circumvented the tired tropes of Victorian Gothicism, and permitted the more philosophical Faustian themes of the tale to take centre stage. It was that perfect amalgamation of the irreverent and the meditative that convinced me to name the book as the greatest literary work of all time, and it was the refined visual style of director Albert Lewin that finally, after a viewing of total 6 meagre adaptations, satisfied my high standards for the book's adaptation. Certainly, the film does not have an efflorescent effect on its source material. Man cannot reach a higher standard of perfection than that which is seen in Wilde's original novella, but it does as much justice to it as is physically possible. Ultimately, this is a truly beautiful and intelligent film, with an extremely underrated screenplay to boot, and one that should be remembered for eternity. Or at least longer than the portrait would ideally last. Undoubtedly the greatest biopic that cinema has ever produced, with the possible exception of Schindler's List, Raging Bull is a powerful and captivating work of art. Free of the spurious dynamism that would so jarringly appear in Scorsese's later efforts, it remains the renowned audieur's finest film. Magnificent drama, coupled with expertly choreographed sword fighting, was the forte of Oriental auteur Akira Kurosawa, but his directorial prowess with its combination had never effectuated such a long-lasting resonance as it had with Seven Samurai, a film that rouses laughter, lamentation, and lust for blood. One part film noir, one part psychological thriller, one part slasher film, and all part Hitchcock, Psycho is still every part as chilling an experience as it was in 1960. The oppressive sensation of uncompromising grit has never been elicited on screen with such virtuosity. Damn it, Spielberg, why can't you make more films like this one? Flawless storytelling and a masterful evocation of terror are rarely found in films of this variety. Yet they emanate with such a resplendence in The Exorcist that one cannot fathom how such a film as this could even possess an exploitative air, regardless of the sour impression of the works of Philistines such as George A. Romero and Eli Roth would have left a long time ago. There have been a plethora of semi-autobiographical films that have boasted invigorating creativity and vibrancy, but none to the degree that Fellini's weird and wonderful masterwork has. A surrealist comedy about director's block is hardly a mainstream prospect, and that is arguably why the film is so good. While the labyrinthine schematics of this frolicsome Arcadian revue are worthy of veneration alone, the soundtrack is what really makes this film so superb. Personally arranged by Tati, the soundtrack is so impeccable that guffaws can be elicited from the mere slurp of whipped cream from a can. If any film could be boasted as a rival to the mise-en-scene of 2001, this one will be it. Sweeping romanticism and pulp fiction meet in this majestic and beautiful crime opera. The cast is perfect. Quite simply, the greatest film of all time. The mise-en-scene is unrivaled to this day. I wonder, Mr. leave such an impression with whatever top 20 films that festering organ that once constituted your brain might select. We shall just have to see. I am very near completing a master's degree in literary criticism. Suck on that.